Hi, and welcome to the FX Podcast. I'm John Montgomery. Our guest for this episode is Michael Cioni. He's CEO and founder of his current company, Strada, but he does describe himself as a serial entrepreneur, having started several companies over his 25-year career, with the desire of bringing new technologies to the mix to help storytellers. Now, in the podcast, the guys discuss the really significant changes that are happening in the industry, especially how it impacts traditional Hollywood production process and distribution, and how that whole landscape is changing. And speaking of distribution, they also talk about the traction of YouTube and how it's changing those traditional models, as well as changing production requirements. Now, at the end, Michael also gives a bit of an overview of his latest project, Strada, which aims to assist remote collaboration on projects with a peer-to-peer file sharing system that's really cool. That's all without using a cloud storage service. Now, for those of you listening to this, we do have a video version of this podcast, which you can see on the fxguide YouTube channel. There's a link to it in the article on fxguide. So let's go ahead and cross that conversation now with the two Michaels.
So, Michael, thanks so much for doing this. It's great to talk to you. Great to see you.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's been a long time following each other, and it's always great to be with you.
So you did this terrific chat at a conference recently where you were talking about Hollywood and what it would take to sort of save Hollywood and how Hollywood has got. Though I think before we even go any further, we should define what you mean by Hollywood. But I want to follow up on that talk. So let's start there. What was this Hollywood of which you were referring?
So I was invited to be the keynote speaker of the Hollywood Professional Association. So the HPA, and the H in there helps kind of explain what we were saying here. And to your question, Hollywood to me in this context represents people who tell high caliber stories that are typically consumed by theatrical or television or streaming services that are paid for. So that can be everything from movies to episodic on broadcast, news and sports even, and of course, streaming services like Netflix and Amazon. But Hollywood isn't, in this case, representative of a geographic location, rather an affiliation that you may have with the types of stories you tell. And I know it's an unfair way to catalog these things, but as I said in the speech, I live in Hollywood. It's short and fast and easy to say, and most people know what I mean when I say that. So it's no disrespect to people down under who absolutely make Hollywood quality stuff in the Hollywood style. And I've lived in Chicago and New York, and Hollywood can be everywhere.
Yeah, it's a little easier to say than industry professional in the M&E or media and entertainment sector. Comes off the tongue a little quicker. Okay, so in that presentation that you did, which I enjoyed, you were discussing a whole bunch of things. But I think the biggest thing is, one of the things that I took away from it is how quickly you were characterizing this shift as having happened. And obviously there's been a couple of big shifts. There was the digitization of visual effects post-production back in the day. There was obviously the same thing that went through with that wave of digital cameras. Both you and I obviously were associated and worked with and bought Red cameras, for example. And then there was this sort of period that you described, which was almost, to me, it felt like you were talking about just pre-pandemic and today, which is really only 5-6 years. Is that a fair summary of like the sort of the recent shift in the landscape?
And almost. I actually think it's been about 10 years.
Okay.
And I actually think that tracks with the average amount of time it takes for any permanent, significant change to actually take hold. In our minds, especially with you and a lot of your listeners, you're early adopters. So when, I think we first met when Red came out in 2007. We were fully bought in by 2008, right? Like it took very little time for us to be like, this is it. Or Final Cut. Maybe we met each other in 2001 or 2 during the early Final Cut days. If you were there at the beginning of Final Cut, or the beginning of P2 with the HVX 200, or Red 1, or something like that, you were bought in right away. But if you really look at what it takes for a global industry to change, it's 10 years of that to really take shape. And that's not just because people are slow to change, which they are. It's also because nobody builds one technological solution that solves every problem. You need other companies to work to support all the areas that you don't serve, right? And that takes them time to get it on their roadmap, understand the business. because it's the ancillary tools that have to also grow with new movements and changes. And that takes time for them to take hold. And then people have to learn them, teach them, train them, buy them, fix them, improve them. And that's a whole decade's worth of work. So I actually think the transition and acceleration of the creator economy that has simply overtaken the Hollywood space started in 2015. And that's when all of us started looking at and watching YouTube on a somewhat of a consistent basis, looking at Twitter, Instagram, and those things. And they, and in 2015, TikTok was almost nobody knew about it. Very few people had it, right?
Yeah.
And but 10 years later, we're in the billions, right?
I mean, my first inkling of this massive shift was when it dawned on me one day that they'd shifted YouTube from being you can only upload a short clip to you can upload a half an hour. And it was almost like I was like, well, I discount YouTube because if you can only upload a short clip, then it's, funny things that you got on your VHS or camcorder. Once it was like you can upload half an hour, it was like, well, hang on a second, but my initial reaction was, and we were making fxguide TV and posting it ourselves, but my initial reaction was, well, why do I want to make money for YouTube? Like by sending all these eyes to YouTube, I want to keep them on my site. But I was alone in that opinion because clearly everybody else thought it was much easier, and it was. And that was the.
Well, I would say, Mike, you weren't alone because of what you did, and a lot of people like you that needed to work with content that was longer and higher caliber and used for creative professionals. You had to self-host it because there was no way for YouTube to serve those people with long form and curated experiences and things like that. So you were doing it right. But YouTube caught up to that, and it actually widened the net. Now, most people that are really successful on YouTube were not doing what fxguide was doing in 2012. They just weren't doing it. They came along between 2015 and 2020. That's when everybody started to realize YouTube was the best vehicle for this. And part of that is because of YouTube's search. What makes YouTube remarkable is the search behind it. It isn't the playback engine. Anyone can build a great player, and YouTube's is exceptional, but it's just a player. But it's the search that you can spell 14 things wrong and still find what you're looking for. That's the power of Google inside of YouTube, which made it really powerful. And that's where the explosive growth became possible because people could access everything through YouTube's search or Google search, which are effectively, siblings. And that's where that growth really, really exploded. And then they could serve you more of what you wanted, which of course, your website, my websites, we couldn't serve people other things that were similar to us because we were all in our own vertically integrated environment with our products and tutorials and websites and stuff. YouTube serving widened it even more. And that's where everything has really changed.
So now why I said initially that I felt it was just before pandemic, because if you go back to that period that you're talking about, 2015, 2017, in my mind, I was still doing the thing that I actually criticized others for, which is taking content from one medium and assuming that in a new medium, it would look the same. So unbeknownst to me, I was doing exactly what I was criticizing others for, which was saying, they did radio. So they did radio plays on television, but it wasn't until you did it. And then you go, they took this thing and just assumed that. So when the internet came along, it was like, hey, take books and put them online, get a PDF and make it an online brochure. And then you go, no. It's the platform, and companies like YouTube, and for that matter, Facebook, made nothing. All they did is provide the platform. And so my shift for this was, I believed what you wanted to watch on YouTube was what you'd want to watch on television, which in fact was the downfall of remember Microsoft came out with Net TV? There were just a whole lot of people that failed by that logic. What I think you isolated well in your talk, and I'd love to get your opinion on now, is that there's this phenomenon of people watching things that I just wouldn't have thought that they would watch. It's basically someone talking to camera, or worse, somebody just recording a Zoom call or something, or basically a podcast where there's just talking heads. And I'm like, that's not a variety type TV show. That's not a magazine format TV show. That's not a Entertainment Tonight type. That's just something completely different. And yet, as you were pointing out, that's become hugely popular.
Yeah, what's really fascinating to me is the fastest growing new format of all formats is podcasting, video podcasting specifically.
Like this one.
This is like this one. This is not a form of entertainment that actually existed. It's a new form because it isn't radio, it isn't talk show, and it isn't purely podcast, which is that word of iPod and broadcasting smashed together, right? It's not that. It's new. And we just have called it video podcasting, but there's something really approachable and accessible about it. It feels authentic, and it's the fastest growing thing. It's so fast that even products like Spotify have now added video into their platform, which 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, would have seemed totally like that's the wrong thing. And I'm sure there were people at Spotify, I don't know this, but there were probably discussions like, should we spin off a video version of Spotify? That was probably half the room. And the other half of the room is probably like, no, just add video into audio. No, but that'll confuse people. That's not why they want us. That's not what we're known for. I think they made the right decision to just add video into Spotify and keep up with the changes. I think Spotify, maybe a few years from now, might be a great case study of how to maintain your dominance and pace by taking major risks like this. Instagram did it. I remember being with Taka-san at Panasonic in Tokyo, doing some Vericam stuff. Actually, I think it was Panasonic's 100th birthday. I got invited to go to Tokyo and be a part of their 100th birthday. And they had their very first product and products for every year in a museum. It was amazing. And I think the first product they made was a converter of our light bulbs here in North America to work in Japan. I think that was the first Panasonic product. So you could plug a light bulb in over there 100 years ago. Anyway, when I was there, I was in an elevator, and that's when Instagram released Instagram stories, and it just popped on. And I remember clicking it, and I remember like, what's happening? And I try it, and I'm in this elevator over Tokyo going up on one of these impossibly high buildings. And that was my first Instagram story post. And it was an amazing moment for me experientially and visually. And then it disappeared a day later, and I was so confused. Like, wait, where did it go? Did I delete it? And this was, their response to things like Snapchat and a Vine and things like that. And they dominated with taking these risks and adding these types of things. And so what we have to do, and what we're really bad at, this is where Hollywood is so good at making the hardest things. And I will always say, good narrative stories are the hardest things to create. And that's never going to really get easier. In fact, we shouldn't want it to get too easy. Wink, wink. But what Hollywood's really bad at is keeping up with the changes, because we are such great stewards of protecting tradition. And protecting tradition is dangerous when that tradition holds you in place and starts defending legacy, maybe even archaic ways because of a feeling. Right?
Well, I think also we've got to defend ourselves a little in that we were brought up where it was beaten into our skulls that broadcast quality was a thing, right? It had to be broadcast quality. If it was broadcast quality, then, you'd arrived. And that was like, your calling card that I can do and do broadcast quality. Now, I mean, there's film quality as well, et cetera. But at that level of video, it was like, is it broadcast quality? And you made the point that filtered into a whole lot of standards and a whole lot of things that were both great at kind of providing reassurance, but also a bit of a straitjacket.
Yeah, absolutely right. I call it the competitive moat because it protected us, because broadcast quality was so difficult to overcome. That friction was good, which is why we validated the cost associated with consuming high quality content. But here's the thing. And I've really tried to check myself on this, because I try to beat on these concepts. And this particular presentation was written with my brother, Peter, my co-founder of several companies, including Light Iron, and this one, Strada. But what Pete and I really want to beat up on is like, do we really believe some of these things? We'll be talking and chatting and come up with this idea. And then we got to beat on it to make sure it holds up to our scrutiny of our own experiences, right? And when it comes to that competitive moat, the thing that is really tough to swallow is that the things that created friction that protected us were all based on good efforts, good faith. There was really good intention. And a good specific example would be when the Red camera came out 15, 20 years ago, when we were doing that, a minute difference between 2398 and 24 in frame rates can really screw up a lot back then. A lot can go wrong. People's movies are out of sync. They're trying to deal with the sound house. How are we going to convert this? Videotape down conversions were a nightmare and a mess with these frame rate conversions. When we had to switch to PAL, you're at 25 frames per second. All of that done wrong is a total calamity. So these standards and practices helped us ensure that wherever you were in the world, everything looked as close as possible to what was the original intent. The funny thing is, and I believe this now, it is becoming increasingly hard to screw things up. Now, some listeners are going to be like, oh, I got a screw up story for you, but we all have them.
No, I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
But I think it's getting harder to screw it up. And if you do screw it up, it's actually easier to untangle the knot, where 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, untangling the knot was like nobody slept for 3 days types of situations.
Oh, my example of that is, remember we used to sit in a post house and say, only put on one monitor because no two monitors are the same. And if they fall in love with one monitor and they see it on a different monitor, you're screwed, right? So just have one broadcast monitor that cost like $30,000 or something. That was like a big Sony thing that weighed a ton. And then you were safe, right? Because that was truth. And now I can't tell the difference between the color science of my iPad, my iPhone, and my screen, because all three of them are so perfectly aligned that colors do look the same on my iPad, my iPhone, and my Mac screen. And that was something I only ever dreamt of back in the day.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you.
I used to say one of the greatest things about the internet, this is like 10, 15 years ago, I used to tell people, because people were really hung up on frame rates, aspect ratios, and resolutions. They were really hung up on that. Not resolution and acquisition, but exhibition. And I said, the internet, I used to have a slide that I used to teach a class called Redefining. And I started it with Ted Schilowitz, our friend Ted. And this was in 08, maybe 09. And we were teaching Red, because we had to teach people how the heck does this thing work, right? And how do you do workflow? And I used to have a slide that showed quality of exhibition. And there were 3 items on the slide. On the left, which was the lowest quality, was the internet. In the middle was television. And on the right was theatrical projection. And it was a picture of a Christie digital projector, a CP200. A CP2000. And I said, here's what's going to happen. Elements 1 and 3, the internet and the projector, are going to swap. And that's what's going to happen. Television will remain the middle quality. Theatrical projection quality will be the lowest fidelity, and the internet will be the highest fidelity. And people will be like, you're crazy. But that's exactly what happened. Right now, a CP2000 has the lowest contrast ratio, the lowest pixel count, and the lowest amount of color reproduction on screen. And television's in the middle. With you cannot not buy a 4K HDR television. That's just all they manufacture. And then on the internet side, and by the television, I'm also referring to the broadcast space. That's specifically the broadcast space. And then on the internet side, which you plug into your TV, you have the highest resolution, the highest color fidelity, and the most amount of contrast ratio affiliated with that. And the beauty is the internet has no frame rate, it has no aspect ratio, and it has no resolution. There are forms of quote unquote standards that we sort of follow, but you don't have to. In fact, I did 2 of my YouTube episodes recently in scope, in 240, in 4096 by 1152, I think. And so I did them in scope, and YouTube takes that and it doesn't add black bars. It does when it needs to, but it receives a scope signal and it can play that back without your black bars being rendered into it. So there isn't actually a post-production forced letterboxing experience. You just put the actual asset of whatever it is in there. Just that is a remarkable technological advantage that the internet has in that space. And when people freak out about frame rates and offsets and things like that, I'm like, if you put it on the internet, it doesn't matter. But heaven forbid you put the wrong thing on a video system for broadcast. They literally like, we can't broadcast this. And I'm like, you guys are dead if you can't broadcast this because of those little details, right?
Like, the black level isn't exactly the right number. There's a 1 pixel offset at the top of the frame and it's going to get rejected by QC. Yeah, no, I know. Okay, but here's my thing, right? Your talk, which I recommend people go and see, and we'll put a link to in the show notes, very accurately discussed that and extensively discussed that. It also discussed at this point you just raised, which was the discussion around exhibition. What I want to focus on today is a bit that I was like, in a friendly way, yelling at my car speaker as I was listening to a discussion you did recently. When I was like, hang on a second, I want to hear what Michael has to say about where all this leaves post and VFX, because it's true that you can shoot amazing stuff on an iPhone. We don't need to have that discussion because you've successfully had that. But my point is this: in the current environment, which is this area where I think just the authenticity of some of these YouTubers has elevated them to spectacular levels of viewership. Where does that leave the traditional post VFX? And some would argue that there's no difference now between post and VFX. But if we assume for a second, it's more than just trimming in QuickTime the top and tail off a clip for a second, and you're actually doing some work, there's this sense that you might be a professional listening to this and saying, okay, I feel like the industry's in turmoil. Is that the fault of this technology wave? Do I blame YouTube? Do I blame AI? Or is it just a new era and I just need to adapt and change? And so I'd like to get your thoughts on where that leads. I mean, basically, in this new version of Hollywood, is there a post house? Is there a VFX house?
Wow. Yeah. So this one's really near dear to my heart because I started in 2009 with my brother and several others, a company called Light Iron. And over the course of several years, we built multiple light irons. In 2013, we launched Light Iron New York. Then we added about 4 other offices in North America. And then we put Light Iron on wheels, and we're able to do films in Melbourne and
on boats, right? Like you took it
on boats. Yeah. We did them everywhere. Yeah, we did them on boats. We did them in Auckland. We've done them in London, Berlin, and everywhere, Croatia. So we loved all this. But just recently, we sold the company to Panavision in 2015. And just recently, like within the last 10 days, Light Iron New York is shutting down. Now, this is only about 30 days after Technicolor and The Mill were announced to shut down. Panavision Hollywood camera rentals is shutting down. That's announced. And Autodesk laid off about 9% of its staff about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then Pinewood Studios just announced that all this land that they have that they were going to develop stages for, they are now repurposing them for data centers. Data centers, yeah. And so all of this that I just said is in the last 2 weeks. That's a lot. That's a lot coming down the pike. And so the Light Iron closing of New York, which is a very tough town to do post in for a lot of reasons, rent being actually one of the most significant, where that might not factor into most people's, is my post house successful or unsuccessful? Rent usually isn't in the top 10 list. But in New York,
in New York and Sydney, 2. It is. Trust me. Yeah.
On Sydney too. So yeah, rent matters. Yeah. But it's really sad. And the reason this is sad is because it will continue to happen. I know of a couple others that are about to fold, and there will be several that will close over the next 12 months.
But just on that factor, if somebody was asking you at a dinner party that wasn't in the industry, that you would name the top 2 or 3 reasons for that. Is it the strikes? Is it the streamers? Is it AI? Is it this shift in the delivery and the consumption and where the eyeballs are at? Or is it all of the above?
I do want to say that in priorities, it's the latter. It is the shift of the eyeballs, which I call an evolving consumer taste. See, on the whole, we have the same amount of eyeballs to consume all content and the same amount of hours. No matter what we as humans invent, we cannot create actual time.
Yeah.
And so we have, and we don't actually create that many more people. And so what happens is we take the same amount of people, or when we create more people, it takes a long time for them to be consumers.
Well, and unfortunately, some of them don't sort of hang around. So yes, it's not like
that's right. We lose a few in the process of creating a few. So what happens is the slice of the pie of content that is generated is actually consumed by a smaller and smaller group of people every time we add more and more content to watch. Now, normally Hollywood, including myself, would say, so what? Everyone loves us. Everyone knows we're the top. Everyone appreciates what we do. Look at the Oscars. Look at the best sports experiences. Look at all that stuff. Look at movies and box office. But what happened is we didn't factor in evolving consumer tastes. And what you described when you said this show is now a format of entertainment that we wouldn't have bet on. You and I would have both been wrong betting on this as a form of entertainment that people would, believe it or not, rather watch than something produced at 100x the budget it costs to do this. We just wouldn't have bet on that. But it turns out that's what happened. And the data is showing, one of the major data points that backs this up is that of adults, more than 50% of people now watch YouTube on a television set than they do on a mobile device. That's a major breakthrough.
Yeah, that's an astounding statistic, actually, I think. I mean, it's true of my life. Like, I definitely sit down and it's like, hey, I want to see what happened on the Formula One, and it's it happened in the middle of the night. So what do? Switch on YouTube and watch the race highlights, right? Because it's on demand and it'll find it, as you say, in the search engine, and the quality looks good, and I get exactly what I want. But also, I would also factor into that one other tiny thing, which is back in the day of broadcast television, there were a lot of ads made, and those ads were often exceptionally high quality and a great place for basically post houses and VFX people to make money. In fact, we used to joke back in the day that you did feature films for the glory and you did music videos for the creative freedom, but you did commercials for the money. And not just the commercials, but the dubbing and the distribution of old 1-inches to like the TV stations, and redoing regionalized versions so that it had the local dealer for, you do 30 versions, make the ad to get the 30 versions, right? It was not particularly creative work, but man, there was a lot of it. All of that, ads on Google are not the same as the ratio of Super Bowl ads in terms of producing post-production work for artists.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there was good money in that. But these evolving consumer tastes have actually pulled away from what the post-production house's key value add was and is. And when you combine that, so when you said, what is the real reason post houses are in threat, they're threatened, it is all of the above, but the consumer taste is the trigger, because if you don't have people that want to consume an alternative format that doesn't require a post-production company, then it doesn't matter, right? And now, for the first time ever, we have a majority of content, and that's a tough word for people to get comfortable with. The majority of content being created does not require a post-production service company that can achieve a certain level of quality. It's just not necessary. Now, you have to have consumer tastes want that stuff, and it's got to be lucrative for the companies that distribute it, which it is. But it also has to have a technological ability for those people to find it, buy it, figure it out, use it, and make it. And what's so fascinating is the number one way for content creators to learn how to be content creators is to watch other creators of content teach them how to do it. And you're one of them. You are one of the people who actually empower people to learn how to do stuff on their own, so they don't need to go to the traditional ways of doing it. That's so fascinating when you think about the loop that
now I feel
creates.
Guilty.
You shouldn't feel guilty, because I had a person yesterday. I was in a meeting a couple of days ago. I can't say with who, but I was in a meeting, and this clown says to me, so you're AI is taking our jobs, and you support that, and you're taking your jobs. And he was totally out of line. But on the one hand, there is no rule that says any technology that's invented must not replace a job. That, in fact, technology, that is what it is. It is to replace something presumably better, to make something more efficient or faster or automatic or something like that. That is what technology is. And to suggest that in any technology, it must be required, especially for creative people, not to replace anyone creative. Makes no sense because there's no history in that. There's no basis on that. It's actually illogical. It's wrong. It's actually a stifling of innovation, which would do worse for the medium to actually like make rules that hold us back. And the more Hollywood, the quote unquote Hollywood, holds itself to certain traditions and resists certain opportunities for change, the further and further away the creator economy, which has no rules and doesn't care about traditions, is going to get. And the further they go and the faster they go, they will drive up the zeitgeist, which will actually attract more eyes. And if there's more eyes on it, they will increase their market share, thus shrinking the pie that the Hollywood style production groups actually make. We can't afford to shrink anymore. So the shrinking that we were talking about in all those examples of late are all examples of just us betting on ourselves and just assuming that the past would deliver us. In 2024, all these people said we need to survive till 25. Now it's survive through 25. Surviving is hope. Hope is a bad strategy. We need to be proactive. We need to be intelligent and pragmatic. And we need to like have these conversations, but we need to infect ourselves with change. And when you see the video, if you watch the video that Mike's been talking about, you'll notice a few people have said you're very rehearsed in that that presentation. And that's because the audience in that room, I knew would hate it. And the people that were going to see this were going to be very, very frustrated by it. And so I didn't want to get in the way of the data. So I made sure, and I had a very specific runtime that they were going to cut me off if I went over. And I wanted to get all the points out there. So I had to practice it a little bit more than I normally would.
Oh,
but
I
had to get it right.
I have no
for that
criticism of your
audience.
presentation, but I think I want to loop back a little bit on what we were saying just a second ago, right? So for a start, there's one of the problems with saying Hollywood is by definition, it draws a line between you and somebody else, right? So when you're talking about jobs, one of the harsh facts is there are a bunch of people that are being employed doing, for want of a better term, media and entertainment stuff that you would classify as being Hollywood adjacent, but we don't count them as us because they don't come from our background and have our kind of obsession with broadcast quality. And so we say, okay, well, all the jobs are going, as if it's an industry in decline. Like in my country, there's a coal industry, right? Coal industry is in decline because people want less coal, but they don't want less energy. And I would argue the same thing's happening a bit in post and stuff, which is they don't want necessarily a lot more high-end, expensive $1 million suites, but that's not to say they want less entertainment or less content. So that's a problem right out of the gate. But even if we were to say, okay, put a pin in those people that are outside our Hollywood bubble and say that they're Hollywood adjacent, we're not going to count those new jobs as jobs. What I really want to zero down on is two things. The first is, what would be the right strategy and advice for somebody that isn't necessarily the top of the pyramid right now? They're in the sensible kind of what you might call almost working class of video professionals or VFX professionals. Like, what's your advice to those people that have spent a lot of time learning their craft and certainly deserve, to be able to sort of look after their families and everything else, but by the same token, maybe not like a YouTube creator, they're not like a personality that wants to be on camera. What's your advice to those people?
So if we think about those are professionals that are they've dedicated their lives to post-production as a professional, right?
Yeah.
That's who you're talking about. The first thing those people need to do is separate the creative stack from the tech stack. And they need to decide, and they got to pick one. Are they going to be servicing people through a creative service that they create, that they provide, or a technology service? And right now we've been taught do both. That's what worked. I have my tech stack. This is my secret sauce, people called it, which, by the way, I hated that. And then they said, and then we have these really fancy people that can do your sound mixing beautifully, or your audio, sound design, or your color correction, or your visual effects shots, or your even, stuff like that, right? That's that. You need to separate that, because technology has made creative services so easy to do that you really should just focus on the creative part, making that value. Why we go to a good restaurant, because we want someone to create something that's very special for us that we aren't capable of cooking ourselves. And you need to do that. The tech stack is so specific now, and you have to learn how to scale it. I don't think that you can do both anymore. And I don't think people believe that there is such a thing as secret sauce. I don't think they buy it like they used to. They're like, well, my stuff, I don't have your secret sauce. My stuff looks pretty good, right? So you need to either have real secret sauce that you sell as a product to people, or your secret sauce is you. Both of those are good things, but you need to lean into the one and not the other. And then if you, for example, are going to be a creative services group, automate everything you possibly can, which is to shrink your footprint and shrink your tools and shrink the amount of time it takes to do things, so that you can get right to the part that you are great at. If it is sound mixing or color correction or visual effects or editing, then you need to really focus on that, like as much as you can, and automate everything around it. And that would be what has to happen. And I also want to point out one of the biggest tricks that I think, one of the principles that can help us survive for those that are going to make it through it. Let me rephrase that. If we're going to evaluate 5 years from now who survived and who didn't, we get to have a conversation again and be like, well, what was the thing that separates the graveyard from the person with the yacht, right? Because that's certainly going to happen. There are winners in this situation and there are losers, right? So how do we know the difference? In 5 years, it'll be obvious, but here's what I think. When you focus on the hardest stuff, that is where you need to keep leaning towards, versus bifurcating your business in doing the hard and the easy. Now, you told a really cool story of decades back of taking 1-inch machines and making all those versions and dubs and conversions. That's actually really easy. It's totally extinct today for the most part, but it's easy to do, but it was lucrative. So the companies that did that, like dubbing companies, are almost totally extinct. Why? Because the job itself got easy. It didn't just get extinct by the way of you don't need it. It just got easy for the end user to just do themselves. So if we're going to survive, we have to do the hardest stuff. Therefore, if narrative storytelling is the hardest form of storytelling there is, because you and I would never argue that this is hard, what we're doing right now is not hard.
Chatting with friends is not hard, I agree.
It's not that hard. So we're going to make the equivalent of a feature film length project here, but it's pretty easy to make. So that's why we have to lean into the super hard stuff, because the easy stuff is going to get done by the UGC community, the user-generated content. They're going to do everything easy. And whether or not you agree with it or don't agree with it, or you don't like it or don't watch it, won't matter. The world is big enough that people will consume that. They will fill their time with that material. And then we won't be around to do the hard stuff if they take all the work away from us, unless we work exclusively on the hardest stuff. We need to be the brain surgeons of the hospital. The hardest thing that you can possibly do, go inside someone's brain and fix them. Like, that's really hard stuff. That's where we need to focus our energy, and let all the stuff that used to just roll off and be easy, and the making the easy cash, dailies, dubs, conversions, all that stuff, get rid of it as fast as you can and focus your energy on the hard stuff. And those are the companies that are going to survive.
Yeah, I think so if we go back just pre-pandemic, if I was having this discussion with you, what I was saying then, which if you remember was a real discussion about outsourcing, and a really good friend of mine, Ben Grossman, came up with this, but I'm just going to echo it because it was a really good idea. He was saying the model of post is kind of, and VFX was kind of work for hire, it's bidding. And the trouble with it is it's just a failed kind of business model for being able to sustain growth, because the margins are so tight. And the problem with competing on the easy stuff is not just what you've outlined, but again, pre-pandemic, it was that stuff is going to be driven by your cost of money. If I can get low cost of money, in other words, finance that's low, I can have razor thin margins. And as a consequence, I can outbid somebody. And if you're bidding just on who is the cheapest, then you're almost always going to end up tanking. There are very few companies that can win on being the cheapest, because normally, as I say, it's either availability of capital at a low rate, or it goes offshore and you find a community that's been educated but is expecting a lower annual salary, I guess, and so they just compete with you on price. Now, if we jump forward to today, you could argue that the outsourcer of today is automation and AI. I don't think myself that AI has been the thing that has caused the problems that we're talking about in the industry. But I would suggest to you that there is a sort of a sense, for me anyway, that it could be one of the ways to make the hardest stuff pay. And I'd like you to get your opinion on this, but see, I don't actually think that it's that easy right now to put together a complex AI pipeline that solves the problems. In fact, I would say it looks like it's really easy when you see various YouTube clips of different bits and bobs, right? But understanding how to build that complex pipeline that actually delivers is so hard, and it's moving so quickly that there are a load of people out there kind of going, I'd like to do this stuff, but I literally don't know where to start. And I thought I should go over here and learn stable diffusion, but apparently that's not the latest thing right now. And I tell that to my kids and they laugh at me. And then I go, well, hang on, I'll be a prompt engineer. So, oh my God, that's like so 18 months ago. And it's like, so in a sense, picking up on Ben's idea, is what you really want to be is not the doer of all the 600 shots. You're the person that works out how to do the 600 shots. You're the person that says, I'll work out how to do this, and then I'll hand it over to either the outsourcing crew, the team that's competing on money, or automation to do it. But the working out how to put all these bits of the jigsaw puzzle together, that requires real dedication of time and energy. You probably take it for granted. Maybe I take it for granted. I know you probably would be tempted to, but the volume of stuff is so hard for someone to catch up with just understanding the tools. I think specialists in solving creative problems, which after all is why I joined the industry, but that still exists as a really core hard thing to do. And it's actually made harder by this avalanche of AI. But that's my opinion.
You're 100% right. Ben's also right. When you were talking about the back half of the 20 teens, that section you were talking about is can be known as ZIRP. Zero interest rate phenomenon. When you're in a ZIRP cycle of a global economy and money is cheap, all of a sudden those profit margins don't have to go down. You can borrow against it. You can take those types of risks. You can outsource. You can in-house. You can get all that stuff. And ZIRP is really great for filmmaking. And that's why the 20 teens were so good. And it led to peak TV. And all those streamers started up, all those budgets were increased, the amount of content per studio went up, and ZIRP just made that easy. And then we could innovate, we could build stuff, people could buy it, they could test it and try it. How many cameras were coming out between 2010 and 2020? It was amazing, like how many things were invented and delivered. ZIRP was a major component of that. Post-pandemic, when money became expensive and we were sort of forced into a new paradigm of creative collaboration that was immature, right? It wasn't really a mature, so we didn't have mature solutions. A lot of them were duct taped together. That all changed. And AI, I would emphatically say, had really nothing to do with the current state of our industry. In fact, I don't even mention AI, I don't think, in my presentation to the Hollywood executives at the HPA. It wasn't really, it's not really a factor at this moment. Everything has a delayed reaction. And you think about a rock in a pond, the waves don't show up at the shore for a little bit of time. All the waves are contained out in the center. AI has created a splash, but that splash hasn't reached every shoreline. And so we are seeing early signs of it, but everything that's happening right now happened 5 years ago. And it was all of that, 10 years. It's been 10 years that led to this moment of changes that we're facing with a reduction of the overall industry size. And because we didn't see it coming, we're caught off guard. And what I'm trying to suggest is we've already been passed. So this isn't like we need to respond before we lose the race. The race is actually over. We need to get in shape for a new race and just be able to compete. And that's what runners do. they try to continue running and setting up new races and compete again. And then on a new competition, can you perform possibly better? That's what we need to do. AI, I have a company that uses AI, and we built a custom AI inference engine that allows people to effectively automate all the mundane tasks of workflow. And we effectively turn, we have a product called Strada, and it makes a Google experience of your own footage. You can search for anything of your own footage, and we hydrate your media so richly that you can search by a face, a location, an object, an emotion, a line of dialogue, a prop, a time of day, and or a slate. And like all of those are this way of triangulating search for a really powerful experience of finding what you're looking for across a collaborative team. So AI for me is most valuable in its utilitarian forms. And I would say, as a traditional just private citizen, we all use AI in utility forms like Google Maps to find locations where we're going, or having a calendar alert us, or speaking to a smart speaker for a song, right? That's all utility forms of AI that are pretty common. And I think that's really good for Hollywood and media professionals. What I agree with you wholeheartedly, AI is really not built for it's not built for long form. It just isn't. It's so difficult and so expensive and so complicated. And for everyone that listening to this that works in professional media and entertainment, our jobs are hard without AI. It's just hard. It's just hard, right?
Yeah.
Telling these stories, putting together is hard. Once you put AI into it, that actually doesn't make it necessarily easier. It can remove some of the complexity in some area, but like a waterbed, you get a lump in one area if you do a depression in the other. And so it's just moving the problem somewhere else. So maybe you generated an image really easily and you didn't have to shoot it, but you can't keep that image consistent, and you can't change your mind, and you can't really communicate with that image, and you can't make that image 2 hours long. Like, it doesn't work. Like, that's just really not possible. And some people actually are suggesting that the cost of being able to legitimately generate feature-length films is too great for it to ever even be achievable. Some people believe that. Like, it's just too expensive for an individual to generate a legitimate 2-hour output that actually has the same characters with the same voices, wearing the same clothes, walking in the same rooms. And so if suspension of disbelief is a desire for a certain corner of the market, AI is really bad. Even Stable Diffusion can't generate the stability required to tell a cohesive story for 120 minutes. And it would probably take longer to do that than to just shoot it in the first place. And you certainly give up tremendous creative control when working with AI, because you're really not in that much control of it. It kind of,
but even at this level, right? I think, like, I'm with you, but I actually think we're wrong to even talk about AI as if it's a thing and operating at that level. So let's use Strada as an example, right? Like, what I think is really great about what you're doing is it is part of a jigsaw puzzle that I, as a professional, would have in my toolbox to solve problems. Because at the demo level, at the YouTube kind of sort of demo level, AI often looks brilliant. It's like, wow, I just pressed one button, I got this, right? And similarly, I would argue that cloud computing is a bit like that. It was like, wow, I just do everything on the cloud. It's done. How easy, right? And I think I was the person that told our friend the expression, cloud computing isn't anything special. It's just somebody else's computer. You're just renting somebody else's computer, right? And so it gets real expensive. And so the difference between a professional in our industry and the amateur that's, keen but whatever, is if they just got 3 or 4 minutes of stuff, sure, they can use a cloud solution for that. That's no problem. Fine. But if you are a professional using stuff at volume, then it isn't actually the most clever solution to just spend a fortune on cloud storage and a huge amount on just removing everything up to the cloud, because at the amateur level, it's like 2 or 3 minutes material, right? It has great advantages. For a start, I no longer have to worry about backing up and archiving because I just assume that Apple's iCloud or a Google Drive is not going to come back with, disk error and all my data's lost. That doesn't happen. So I've solved a couple of problems that for the amateur is annoying. And I got 2 or 3 computers and I can't remember where I left things, and it can search and find things. Now I switch back to our professional. It's like, well, hang on a second. That's not how it works, because if I have to load a huge amount of material up to the cloud, for a start, I have clients that have got issues. I have costs for that upload. I have time for doing that. And also, I can't keep all of my jobs in the cloud because I'm producing this volume of material every couple of months on every new project. So my industry professional person, the one that I said solves the difficult problems, works out the pipeline that says, aha, I know a solution to this problem that'll fit in. Now, explain what Strada is so we can explain how that might solve this particular problem. But in a sense, knowing that and then integrating it, that's where the skill is, not that your product's going to replace 10 jobs in a post house. But anyway, for the people that aren't listening, don't know, sorry, hopefully they're listening, people that are listening, how does it work?
Well, what's really cool about Strada is we love, because we're building it with beta users using it, we listen to them and they tell us where to point the ship, which is awesome. We are using AI to hydrate files by analyzing images, faces, locations, objects, words, emotions, and things like that. So they can interact with their media and search however it is in their mind or their heart, as opposed to having to remember a clip name, a shoot date, or a slate number, right? But what we learned in putting that out there is that everyone says, I want to be able to do that kind of search on my hard drives, because now this will sound obvious, but it isn't obvious till people articulate it en masse. But they say all my footage, 90% of my footage, maybe more, is on a hard drive or a series of hard drives. And only 5, 6, 7% is actually in a cloud, because of the reasons you said. You can't afford to put certainly raw files in the cloud. You can't afford to keep it there. And the average internet speed is 30 megabits per second. It's not impressive. It's not good enough. So either your files are too big because you shoot on great cameras, your clips are too long because nobody wants to cut, your internet's too slow because you don't have enough upload bandwidth. By the way, internet service providers favor download speed, and upload is always
3 or 4
a fraction.
times as much on download versus upload. Yeah, 100%.
Right. And video, we need upload, right, to collaborate.
Totally.
And even if you had that high-speed internet, you can't afford to keep it in a cloud, because statistics will show you that the average cost of a gigabyte in a cloud is 40 times more expensive than a gigabyte on a hard drive. So you can't keep it there, even if you can get it there. So the cloud, which during the pandemic came really hard and fast and said, we're going to solve your collaboration problems for video, has failed video professionals, because the clouds are too expensive. The internet service providers have their own agendas, which is, again, download focused. And the cloud companies that make software are, they can't control the cost of the clouds or the internet service providers. And the camera companies, they don't care how big a file is. They just make the best looking file, right? And so they don't really care. So these are all independent variables that are competing against each other for it to become efficient. Therefore, it won't become efficient. And even though we could say, well, the internet's going to get faster, based on the speed of cameras today, we would have to pause camera qualities for 10 years and not shoot files any bigger. And then maybe we can catch up in 2035. But if you could assume a file gets bigger, a sensor gets larger, quality goes up, people want 16-bit and 24-bit color sampling in the future, well, then all of a sudden we're chasing our tails again, and we're never going to have enough bandwidth or storage or space to put this.
Yeah, and
so
I mean, there are specialist internet companies like SohoNet and stuff, but let's face it, for most people, they're using an internet provider whose main focus is not media and entertainment, right? Their main focus is just providing companies, and most companies don't have our special requirements of upload and download.
Right.
So even if you did your pausing for 10 years, I really don't know that it would make that much difference, because I really don't think our sector of the market is big enough to warrant it being the primary concern. So So explain how that works. I've got a hard drive. I've shot a bunch of material. I'm really happy with it. And I've come back and I want to do stuff. And I've got a remote office, and I've got a colleague who's got a remote office, and I've got a client office in the city. How does that drive work? And how is it that it's possible that I'm not just having the same problem that you just described in upload, because I'm just waiting for that file to upload from my hard drive to wherever I am?
6 months ago, I'm doing my YouTube channel like you. I'm doing all this stuff with a small team of creative people, building this product, telling our stories. And then we realized that all of a sudden we realized that we were paying something like $2,000 a month for all of our cloud collaboration features and functions, all in aggregate together. And every time I would add a new user, or I would need another terabyte, and it would just charge you and charge you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I used to work for Adobe, right? And my cost of the Adobe Creative Suite kept going up. I used to work for Frame.io. The cost of Frame.io is significant. I use LucidLink. I kept putting footage in there. I use Dropbox and Google Drive, and it just kept going up. And I'm like, when does this end? How can this end? And the answer is it can't end, right? And so when we started hearing people say, I want to access media on a hard drive, and then we realized how critical collaboration is, but how expensive cloud is, we came up with something that's totally different. And we said, why can't we have the benefits of cloud collaboration without a cloud at all? Can we invent a tech stack that actually gives us the sensation of cloud collaboration without any storage? Because every user has their own storage, because you can't download a card from a camera or audio from a mic. You don't download it to the cloud. You put it on a drive and then you upload it to the cloud. Well, what if we could skip that whole part? And so that's sort of what we came up with here.
Because the other thing is, it's not even just that I've got this extra hard drive, right? Just my normal hard drive. Like my latest M3 Ultra has like 12 terabytes of storage. And what does that mean? It means I don't really have a high degree of, I'm not incentivized to delete files. So I want those files and I want them accessible. So like, even if you could solve the upload and upload in the cloud problem, right? Like, we just are keeping more stuff because we've just gotten spoiled by having loads of storage. And so back in the day where we'd employing incredibly expensive, archiving systems, we just tend to keep a bit more stuff online now. So in every respect, having, like just even on your normal computer before you even have the external hard drive, vast amounts of stuff does pose a problem. So you said you could show me the setup. What can you show me?
Yeah. And what you're pointing out should be very familiar to people, is that they have great hard drives, and Thunderbolt's an amazing fast interface. It's easy to use, plug and play. You got these amazing RAIDs that have this incredible performance that used to be very hard to get. Now you can get it off the shelf, but you have all that footage, but you can't, it's really hard to collaborate with, right? You'd have to select a subset of that, upload it to a cloud, which is like sucking a golf ball through a garden hose. And then you can give some people access to that. And that means they only have a fraction of the access after you dedicated time. And you'd have to predetermine what they would need access to. All of that we do automatically, and it's unacceptable. So what you're seeing here is a computer that is here in California, except it's not my computer. It's not my computer. It's a different computer. And you're just seeing a webcam of this computer. But it is 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening here in California. And we're recording this. It's exactly the same time. So this is happening in real time. But what we see on the screen is a laptop, and we can see there's a red reader there. So there's a card from a red camera. We see a SanDisk RAID, which is a nice little 8 terabyte SanDisk RAID. Underneath that RAID is a little SD card in the slot from an FX3. And this is just on Wi-Fi. And I put up there the 36 megabits per second. That's the upload speed, which actually is about the average internet upload speed here in North America, 30 megabits up. And if you look at the top, you can kind of see the icons of the camera card and the SD card and the drive. And next to that is LucidLink, which, for those of you familiar, is a cloud editing tool. So this is just a laptop sitting there. But what's unique is it's running what's called Strada agents. And an agent is going to do something remarkable.
Now, can I just clarify this? This isn't the computer sitting in front of you right this second.
No, No, this is not.
You've
This
got
is
your own
just
computer that you're doing this recording on. This is a separate
That's
computer.
right.
Okay.
That's right. This computer can be anywhere. So now if I share my screen and now I go into Chrome and I'm running Strada, I can look in the top and I can see it says Strada's MacBook Pro. That is actually the MacBook Pro in the little view, the remote computer. And I can see the file system of that remote computer and every peripheral disk that's connected to it. I can see what's on its desktop. I can see, this is the actual Red magazine here. So you can actually see it's got the Red mag here. There's the RDC files from the Red mag. And if you are to look really closely, I'll show this in a second. Here's a raw file. There's an R3D here. Here's the ProRes file, because you can shoot ProRes as well on Red cameras, right? So you can see different files here, R3D and ProRes files. But if I go to this directory here and I click on this folder Harlow, it's going to load a bunch of dailies. But I don't know if you can see what's going to happen is the drive is actually going to start blinking when I hit play here, because the drive is actually playing back these files from the drive itself. The files are not on my computer. And I know this is a screen share to you all the way across the Pacific Ocean, but if you had this, you could play files off of my drive remotely, and there is no cloud. We're not using a cloud to do this. So it's giving me access without any upload whatsoever. There's no cloud storage.
Okay, so for somebody that's watching this that's not super technical, why is this not just remote access to a computer? Why is this not just some kind of, I've got remote access to my laptop?
Right, because those are going to be like a screen sharing technology where you don't have full access to the file. You're just sharing the screen, so you don't get the proper frame rate. You can't manage the audio configuration. Plus, you can't do things like comment on the file and download the file and do transcriptions and things like that, right? Those files are they're just being shared the screen. This is actually presenting the file to you. You can see it's as if it's on my drive. I can go through folders on my own and start looking through different types of assets. I can even look at ProRes files, which are too big to actually play on 30 megabits internet. This is really something. So if I go to a ProRes, this is all loading uncolor corrected log ProRes files. So the thumbnails are coming in. It's quickly generating those. You can see the drive blinking like crazy. Hopefully on your end, you can see that. And it's pulling the files. And now I'll just hit play on this file here. And it's going to start playing back a ProRes file. But this ProRes file might be 300 or 400 megabits per second, but I can play it back as if it's here over 30 megabits per second while I'm on a Zoom with you, because this file is virtualized to me, right? It's not a screen share. It's not FTP. It's not VPN. It is a virtualized version of the file. It's actually more like, it's more like this Zoom call. See, a Zoom call is actually virtualizing a frame to you, and you see a frame and then the frame's gone. There's no file transferring on a Zoom call because there's no file. It's just a virtualization of a moment. We are taking that principle and applying it to hard drives, so you can connect anything to a hard drive, browse that hard drive, and just project a frame of the file. And we just happen to do 24 or 25 frames per second, and it looks like it's moving. And I can even do this with a feature film. Here is the feature film National Treasure, a film everybody loves. And if I play this film back, it's playing right now, because it is not in a cloud, there's no buffering. The drive can play this back without buffering. So if I click at the very end of the film, it's just at the end of the film because the drive can just go right there. If I click in the middle, it'll just be in the middle of the film, because it doesn't have to ask the cloud for it to find those frames, buffer those frames, and then decode the file for you, because there's no file coming here at all. It's just projecting each frame just in time, just like a Zoom. And it effectively is free. Like there is no cost to do this because you didn't have to pay for a cloud to store and share it.
Plus, also you get your agent, right, for its abilities for searching.
Well, this is the funny thing is we are starting to learn, because we're doing this new technology, we have to add in the searching and analytics now to run at the edge, because our current Strada runs the analytics in the cloud.
Right.
So if your footage is on the drive, there's no AI engine there, right? So we have to, over the next 6 months, we'll be moving our AI models to run on your Mac
As
Ultra.
I said, that's what you're going to be adding in now, right?
That's right. And then you can run it in the Mac Ultra. And then, so we start with this, which is playback. In a few weeks, we'll add sharing, then we'll add downloading, and then we'll add commenting. And all of those will be new experiences that allow you to improve the quality of your transmission. And here's one thing that is so cool. I'm excited about. It is pretty nerdy, and it's going to go over most people's heads. But if you ever think about a file transfer, which when you're working on a project, you do hundreds of these files you have to transfer. All file transfer systems are initiated by the person who has the files. So someone has to request from you, I want something. And that person who has the media has to put it in a cloud and then send it. So it's more of a push experience. But with this, the person that needs the file, as long as they're given access to the drive, which you can control, they can just fetch whatever they need. And they don't have to bother you with what you have to push and pull. And there is no upload. It's literally a transfer from your hard drive to my hard drive, and there's no cloud in the middle. And that's really, really a different way of working. And it's more self-serve, and it should be a lot more cohesive.
And it's faster.
It should be a lot quicker. It should be a lot quicker, and it would be way less expensive.
The number of times somebody said to me, hey, I need that file. Can you just put it on Dropbox for me? And I'm like, okay, wait a second. I'll go find the file. Now I'm going to put it on Dropbox. Now I need to get back to what I was doing. So now they've waited for me, and I've also been interrupted. 100%. So to my earlier point, right, this is exciting technology, but for the VFX or the post-professional, it's understanding these technologies, understanding the subtle differences of what the implications of that technology is going to mean for a project. And then the hard stuff is putting that all together, knowing that these bits will work, having familiarity with it. And so in isolation, any one bit seems, I can see that's easy. I can see that's easy. Everything you just showed me then is easy. But knowing about it, implementing it, and making sure that it works, that's the hard stuff. And quite frankly, that's also value add, that you're not competing on price. You're competing on, hey, if I go to Michael, he's going to solve my problems, right? If I'm going to get this guy, I know him, I've worked with him before, he'll make it work, he'll solve my problems, and he understands this stuff, so I don't kind of have to. I feel like that creative problem solving, that's always been the core of our essence. And that's our best future moving forward in terms of job security. Well, not even job security, but sort of a creative job that will grow and have kind of meaningful existence.
You don't know how right you are. It might be too simple. It actually might sound so simple that it's another thing that people can miss. The truth is, I remember when I had my first company, Plaster City, I was extremely transparent about being able to transfer to people what I was doing. I love to be transparent. And that transparency was so important to me. Tell people what we're doing. And this was in the early days of digital cinema. Tell people what we're doing. And I had an employee quit because he said, you're too transparent. You're going to lose us all our business because you're giving the answers to the test. And this person was a little older than me, and they subscribe to the world where you hide everything and you sell it as secret sauce, and you don't tell people your secrets. You sell people that you can solve the problem. But here's the thing. What I doubted this person, and I thought they were wrong, and I think they ended up being wrong. I know they ended up being wrong, because what ultimately happened is by being transparent, you ended up increasing people's trust of you because you were so confident in your ways that you were willing to share the secret sauce that it bred trust. and they hired you anyway.
Yes.
My guess is maybe out of 30 people, maybe one would take all the information I gave them and do it themselves. But 29 other people would say, you know what, I'm just going to pay you to do it anyway, right? And that is absolutely one of the most obvious value adds that we have, is sharing knowledge. And that's why when you're describing workflow and the value that we can have in the professional life, I've always defined workflow not as the tools that people use. I've always defined workflow as the ligaments that join the tools together. Because let's face it, there actually aren't that many tools, and there aren't that many companies that if you're going to choose an editing system or a coloring system or a sound mixing system, you only have a few options. It's really not that vast, but there's a lot of ways you can connect them together. How you connect Avid or Final Cut to Nuke or Maya to Resolve or Baselight, there's a lot that can happen in those ligaments.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the value of people actually lives, in the joints. And the best people know how to fit those together efficiently. And it isn't about, can the AI do this or that for me? Because it cannot connect things together. Even if you're good at Zapier hacks and things like that, AI isn't really easy to connect together, and it doesn't really work in bulk. And everything in storytelling, we don't do one of anything.
Yeah.
We do 50, a minimum of 50.
Work out how to do the 50 things in a way that works for the creative team and that's sustainable, right? Like Comfy UI is a good example, right? You can get Comfy UI and you go, look at this real great demo. And it's, yeah, that's a really amazing demo. It's like, okay, but there's a difference between that and knowing the next time somebody uses Comfy UI, it'll automatically download another revision and it'll suddenly have a conflict with Nuke and it won't be able to work and it'll all just fall in a heap. And it's like, well, yeah, it worked for the one, but to make it work so I would say, in addition to what you just said, AI is a lot of more bones. In other words, you just said there aren't many choices on color correctors. I agree, right? Like, you're probably going to use DaVinci, right? But if I said to you, I'm going to do some image generation, like the number of options for me right now are just so vast. Knowing which of those is going to be around, which of those is reliable, which of those is going to be the right color space that somebody else is going to want further down the pipe. All of those things are really, it's actually a really exciting time, because if you can immerse yourself in this stuff, you can so not compete on price. You can compete on trust and insight into creative problem solving. So I'm actually kind of up on the fact that this stuff that's happening with AI is not the death of our industry, but actually like a window. But I will agree with you. You can't rely on the moat of complexity of tasks, the buy-in factor being your moat, that only people with like lots of money can do it, and only a few houses can afford the suites, and only a few people have broadcast quality. Those moats have gone. You have to rely on reputation and on you being good at doing what you do and creatively coming up with those solutions. So look, we've run out of time. We've kind of run over, but I think it was such a good discussion. I'm super happy to have done it. But Michael, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. I'm looking forward to jumping on Strada and seeing how it progresses over time. I'm particularly interested in your roadmap that you've outlined. So I look forward to maybe looping back with you in 12 months or whatever.
Well, my pleasure. And I want to congratulate and thank you for being such a consistent voice in the industry that is in favor of having these discussions and putting the information out there so people can elevate their own worlds. You've been doing that for the longest time, longer than many people have been creating, and it really makes a dent and a difference. So congrats to you as well.
Well, that's very kind of you. Anyway, for now, guys, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate it. See you.
Well, thanks so much, Michael, for taking time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed listening to the discussion, as well as seeing a sneak preview of the collaboration software we're working on. I can certainly see it being useful to us here at fxguide between collaborating here in Mexico and Sydney. So I look forward to seeing how it all rolls out in the coming months. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to listen or watch the FX podcast. For this episode, I'm John Montgomery. We'll see you next time.